Good morning and most welcome to 1381. We will today at least begin with a new, rather longish article by Stephen M Rosen. How can we signify being? Semiotics and topological self-signification. And this is an extract from the book Cosmos and History, the Journal of Natural and Social Philosophy, Volume 10, Number 2, 2014. And I am at page 250.
Which is the first page also.
Yes, which is where the article starts. Thank you. I still haven't gotten my wireless microphone. I realized I have to go to the administration. But fingers crossed for me that I get them later today. Small step for humanity, big one for us. How can we signify being? Semiotics and topological self-signification. Abstract. The premise of this paper is that the goal of signifying being, central to ontological phenomenology, has been tacitly subverted by the semiotic structure of conventional phenomenological writing. First, it is demonstrated that the three components of the sign, vehicle, object, and interpretant, bear an external relationship to each other when treated conventionally. This is linked to the abstractness of alphabetic language. which objectifies nature and splits subject and object. It is the subject-object divide that phenomenology must surmount if it is to signify being. To this end, we go beyond alphabetic convention and explore the use of iconic signs. Following the lead of Merleau-Ponty, the iconic expression of being is seen as entailing paradox. We are directed to the fields of visual geometry and topology, where we work with three paradoxical figures. The Necker cube, Möbius strip, and Klein bottle. While the Necker cube and Möbius prove to have their limitations in fully signifying being, the Klein bottle, possessing an added dimension, can embody being more intimately. Provided that it is approached in a radically non-classical way. The essay closes with the realization that the most concrete signification of being must be a self-signification. Here the author removes his cloak of anonymity and makes his presence tangibly felt in the text. End of abstract. Over the centuries, much has been written by philosophers seeking to shed light on the meaning of being. Inspired by the 18th, 19th century works of F. W. J. von Schelling, ontological phenomenologists, Merleau-Ponty and Martin Heidegger. And their followers have emphasized that being can be elucidated effectively only by surpassing the division of subject and object. Long prevalent in mainstream philosophy. Yet, whatever the content of the phenomenological discourse, on being. However much this has reflected the intention of surmounting the subject-object divide. The underlying semiotic structure of such discourse has been tacitly geared toward maintaining the split. This has resulted in an implicit objectification of being geared toward maintaining the split. This has resulted in an implicit objectification of being that has undermined phenomenology's central aim. In the present essay, I will attempt to spell out the inadequacy of conventional semiosis for the signification of being. And to offer a semiotic alternative more equal to the task. Conventional semiosis. In the most general terms, a sign is any entity capable of conveying meaning. Semiotics pioneer Charles Sanders Peirce identified three basic components of the sign. First, there is the representamen or sign vehicle. The physical token that does the signifying. Peirce also called this the sign in its own material nature. The sign as in itself. And the ground. The thing to which the sign refers gives the second component of the Peircean triad. The sign's object. Thirdly, there is the interpretant. Defined as the meaning the sign conveys to the one who views or reads it. every interpretant implies an interpreter, mind, or subjectivity that takes it in. In characterizing the sign as a representation, Peirce sums up his fundamental triad. A representation is that character of a thing by virtue of which, for the production of certain mental effect, it may stand in place for another thing. The thing having this character I term a representament. The mental effect or thought, its interpretant, the thing for which it stands, its object. In conventional text, the three aspects of the sign are related to each other in an external manner. Here, sign vehicles are primarily alphabetic. Consisting of graphic marks on a page. Such as the squiggles you are now processing as you read this essay. given that these signifiers have been arranged on by convention and are purely arbitrary in themselves, the meaningful objects to which they refer can only be other than what the signifiers themselves inherently are. Last sentence is crucial. In the English language, the word boat can have no intrinsic relation to the object floating in the water. We just agree to refer to said object with that combination of letters. Our system of alphabetic signs was designed to serve the interests of detached subjects who stand aloof from the objects cast before them. As a consequence, the relationship between the semiotic object of the conventional text and its interpretant the meaning of the sign as given to the mind of the subject who reads it. Is also entirely external. Anthropologists Jack Goody and Ian Watt indeed brought out that the rise of alphabetic literacy in the middle of the first millennium BCE. Coincided with the appearance of a new and more abstract form of subjectivity. Emerging from intimate participation in a mythic culture governed by orality, the now more sharply differentiated individual devised a system of writing that surpassed the impermanence and ambiguity of the spoken word. A system that would enable the world to be objectified and analyzed with greater precision. Than ever before. To be sure, though orality was dominant in pre-literate mythic societies, systems of writing had already been developed. The earliest pictograms coming into use millennia before the Greek alphabet. but these precursors of mature literacy were cumbersome, inefficient, and equivocal. With the perfection of alphabetic writing at the hands of the Greeks, the graphemes now used could be combined so as to point to the reference with unprecedented clarity. Reducing ambiguity to a minimum. The resulting accuracy enabled a far more effective objectification and analysis of the world than in earlier systems of writing. Or speaking. A passing of reality into distinct categories and compartments, as is evident in the logico-empiricist tradition that arose in Greek science and philosophy. The kinds of analysis involved in the syllogism, say, Godi and what, and in other forms of logical procedure are clearly dependent upon writing, indeed upon the alphabetic form of writing. Only the analytic process that writing itself entails make possible the habitual separating out into formally distinct units of the various cultural elements whose indivisible wholeness is the essential. Characteristic of the thinking of non-literate people. And alphabetic literacy goes hand in hand with greater individuality. A more clearly defined center of identity. A subject or self whose starkly etched boundaries sets it apart from others and from the world. The objectification of language via alphabetic signs and the rise of individuality are explicitly tied together when Godi and Watt say that writing by objectifying words and by making them and their meaning available for much more prolonged and intensive scrutiny than is possible orally encourages private thought. Literate culture, say the authors, is inward and individualistic. Two, the call to being and semiotics. in his essay, The End of Philosophy and the Task of Thinking, Heidegger asserts that philosophy ends with the mid-19th century coming to dominance of scientific positivism. Modern science is thus what philosophy becomes in the limit, and philosophy's end is not a mere termination, but a culmination of the scientific project. Heidegger states accordingly, the end of philosophy proves to be the triumph of the manipulable arrangement of a scientific technological world. I will make a little mid-summary here. Welcome back. A little summary here. Writing according to Godey and Watt makes it possible to divide language. And this is very true. When thinking of it, it seems impossible that people before written alphabets would have been able to understand the separatedness of the words. They came as a whole. Writing brought in divisibility, the ability to divide, to fragment, if you like. And that, of course, makes the syllogism and logic possible. Even more so, it makes it possible to have, if you like, an inner talk, as I call it here. Self-talk. No longer is language only directed outwards, unbeknownst to the speaker. Another mode of talking, thinking becomes possible. This is what is referred to in the literature as the reflective consciousness. Julian Jaynes means that the advent of the bicameral mind in two parts make consciousness as such possible. To reflect on one's own thinking. Oddly enough, Ian McGilchrist takes another standpoint there. He says that the very advent of a division in mind makes consciousness possible. In a way, they amount to the same. And I say they could be traced back to the specific evolution of writing in the Mediterranean basin, the development of high culture, and the advent of the I, the subject, a sort of division that also, as we started with Heidegger, says gets terminated by the 18th, 19th century. It reaches its telos, becomes locked and self-defined. So I think there is an interesting aspect brought out by Goody and what the event of individual viewpoints in a detached way, the same as the new understanding of thinking. Thinking itself became divisible. Each thought could be separated and, for instance, put into a syllogism to make for a conclusion or a reflection, of course later coming to be at the end of this development mentioned, when it comes to its end, a sort of perfect understanding, a sort of a theory of everything, the end of understanding. Maybe there's a comment from my dear colleague here, Kalle. Give you the microphone here.
Hello, hello. So Stephen M Rosen speaks about the alphabet and writing systems in general. Writing systems in general. Let me see how this works. And I would like to refer to McGilchrist, who puts on the right hemisphere. He puts on the right hemisphere of the brain. You have horizontal lines. No, excuse me. On the right hemisphere, he puts vertical lines like this, and he also puts on this writing from left to right. So this is about how we write. So what favors the right side of the brain? That is writing from up and down, or generally speaking, vertical writing, and also what favors the right side of the brain is like the semiotic writing, like Arabic and Hebrew, when you write from right to left. So far so good, and the left side of the brain, that is the side of the brain that should not dominate, but should be, it prefers instead horizontal lines like this, and it also prefers like we write from left to right. He speaks about the Greek alphabet. Rosen speaks about the Greek alphabet. And I would like to add that in the beginning, when the Greek alphabet was introduced to Greece, the Greeks wrote from right to left and then from left to right. Like this was called I will now actually write how they wrote Don, like how the ox blows. The woos is the ox, and strophodon is the turn. Is how the ox plows the field, and this is my hypothesis. But I would say that it favors the right side of the brain because it follows what McGilchrist says, that is from vertical lines, and it's also natural. Rosen speaks about the sign. And there is a division, separation between the sign and the signified. When does this separation occur? I have a theory. So here it's important to notice that the eye and the hand are one and the same. The sign and the meaning are the same. But when people began to write, when the Greeks began to write from left to right, there's a separation between, division between the eye and the hand. And you also begin to imagine there is a division between meaning and the sign. And as you can see here, the Greeks could also write letters from like a mirror images. So scholars have discussed the secret between this Greek flowering, the archaic flower. Why was this bloom of culture, and you had all these great writers, Homer, Aeschylus, all these poets, Pindar, Sophos, Heraclitus. I wonder if there is one secret in this booster of writing which favors, I would say, the right side of the brain. There is no division between sign and the signified. How can you? So, please, Hans, do you want to add something? This, I could also add one thing. Barbara Tversky, you mentioned her more than 1 hour and about 18 months ago, and how she spoke about cave paintings. You could perhaps explain how it works, like visually the cave painting. What was her argument? I think it relates to this.
Very good. When you tell me there, I get an idea that this is closer to, it's like intermediate between complete separatedness and the oral language, and then you need to keep it still, and the non-understanding or pre-understanding of division before division. Very good. Almost look like speaking oral language in a flow, and you can get a feeling for how the people came from a millennias and millennias of oral thinking, oral talking, unaware before the event of divisibility, of division. It's sort of the first step, but still at this stage in wholeness, it resembles something that could be seen as one thing. But already here you get a sense, and you can come into the divisibility. And it's very good when you mention also this is a necessity to have separatedness in the lines for the syllogism. It's impossible to have a syllogism without that being established. Barbara Tversky, it's much before this epoch, and when she talks about decontextualization, taking something out of a pre-verbal context, taking it out of its context, making it separate, and recontextualize it, could be seen as something happening much before sharing similarities. But I would say you are still within the right hemisphere at this stage. It's hard to divide experience other as a tool. Very good. This is so much more oral than this becomes more stern, detached, sharp, and can bring, as you say, meaning, can have meaning apart. And most definitely in the caveman situation of Barbara Tversky, no separation would be possible.
And indeed, the caveman knew about the wolf, that is the ox, and the caveman would paint it. So it's a natural.
It's a natural thing. Thank you very much, Kalle. I will continue with Heidegger.
Priest.
No.
With Rosen, yes.
So intuitively one could say this separatedness as depicted by Heidegger goes into the positivistic science and thereby reaching its end, its telos, already in its seed here, in its germination. The transformation of philosophy into positivistic science was long in the making, beginning with the advent of alphabetic writing that made possible the logical, empirical initiatives of the early Greeks, as we just saw. Following the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the advancement of science was taken up at an accelerated pace in the work of Galileo, Descartes, and Newton. These developments reaching their climax in the 19th century with the great successes of science and technology noted by Heidegger. Specifically, the accomplishments including the discovery of electromagnetism, the, the invention of photography, the telegraph, and the telephone. The refinement of laboratory instruments, and exact techniques of measurements, and many more. My comment here, it all started with divisibility of a sort of atomism in what became a disjunct between sign and signifier. Necessary from one aspect, but also troublesome. From the standpoint of ontological phenomenology, the millennia of scientific progress can be seen as generally involving a process of individuation, wherein subject and object were driven apart. And being was cast into shadow. In Heidegger's view, now that philosophy has been brought to an end, by being transformed into science, we can consider a possibility for thinking that was never properly addressed in the entire history of philosophy itself. This long neglected first possibility for thinking is the thinking of being as such. In dimensions of apeiron, I went into depth on Heidegger's call to being. His effort to elucidate being through his meditations on the notion of opening or unconcealment, aletheia. And on the phenomenon of light. All of these matters are linked to the question of subject and object. As I brought out in the earlier work, presently I want to take up an issue that is perhaps more basic than the content of Heidegger's ruminations on being. Namely, the semiotic delivery system for expressing being. What I propose is that, heeding the call to being, thinking being, and writing being in an effective way ultimately requires going beyond the alphabetic abstractions originally complicit in being's banishment. Heidegger tells us that with the exception of Parmenides' fragmentary glimmer of aletheia at the outset of philosophy, being has gone unthought. The absence of being from Western philosophy should come as no surprise when we realize that philosophical thinking has relied on alphabetic writing from its inception. For we have learned that in the alphabetic splitting of the sign, the sign vehicle is divided from its object that renders being forever an object in the alphabetic text. Assuring the forgetfulness of being per se. The consequent dilemma for ontological phenomenology is this: how can we write meaningfully of being when our very manner of writing keeps being away? Let me put it this way. In the signification of being thus far carried out by ontological phenomenology, the Sein has referred to its signified content in a merely external fashion, projecting being as an other. A free-floating semantic object cast before the reading subject. Our infatuation with the content of our texts has inclined us to lose sight of this process of projecting abstract meaning before a detached reader. And as long as we employ these means of signification, though the content of our writing may forcefully demonstrate or poetically express the way in which being surpasses the division of subject and object, at the deeper level of the manner in which that content is tangibly delivered. Being will continue in eclipse, for it must appear as but an object separated from the subject who reads it. Taking into account then the concrete reality of how the meaning of being is conveyed. Any conventional mode of writing about being can do naught but objectify it. How incredibly true, my comment. To repeat the central question of this essay, can we find a different mode of writing, one that can give voice to being without turning it into an object? Chapter 3, Embodying the Ontological. The earliest forms of writing were the pictogram of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. These first signs were not alphabetic, but iconic. the Sein vehicle bore a tangible likeness to its object. A boat was signified by a picture of a boat. In contrast to the alphabetic writing that was to come later, the pictographic sign vehicle and its object were related internally. In referring to the object, the sign vehicle did not merely point to what was other than itself, but pointed to itself, to its own graphic composition. The sign vehicle and its object come together for the third element of the sign, the interpretant. The meaning the sign has for the subject. We have seen that the rise of alphabetic literacy in ancient Greece was coupled with an enhanced experience of individualized subjectivity. In the pre-alphabetic cultures that preceded the Greek, there was relatively little awareness of oneself as standing apart from others. Instead, the prevailing feeling was of participating in community, of being immersed in a social context. This intimate entwinement with one's surroundings must have shaped the first experiences of pictographic semiosis. Four millennia ago, when the sense of egoic subjectivity was as yet weakly developed, the Sein's meaning must have suffused the fledgling subject. For there could have been no circumscribed subject standing apart from the Sein. This way of encountering signs is no doubt foreign to the contemporary adult reader. But what about the child? I would like to recount a personal experience that speaks to this question. A while back, I was rummaging through some old belongings and happened upon a book of mine from childhood. It was colorful, richly illustrated volume featuring a large centerfold map of the United States showing logging in the northwest, cotton farming in the south, and so on. I do not believe the book had even entered my mind since I was 6 or 7 years old. And suddenly, coming across its centerfold image, seemed to bring back my original experience of it. As a child viewing this page, I could see vividly the logs splashing down the white water river. I could feel the fluffy texture of the cotton in the field. Could sense the warm sun beating down on me in the Arizona desert. To me, these iconic signs were not just images on a page, but constituted a world in which I was immersed. If ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, I suggest that the semiotic encounter I had with my childhood book mirrors the broader cultural experience of semiosis when writing was in its infancy. We can say in general that pre-alphabetic signification was an intimate affair in which all components of the sign were related internally. In the 2 millennia that follow the first appearance of writing, signs became less and less concrete, with writing passing. From icons based on images to symbols based on abstraction. This process reached its climax with the establishment of the Greek alphabet. And which accompanied the transition to a culture that externalized relations, splitting subject and object, and relegating being to oblivion. It seems clear that if we presently wish to follow phenomenological philosophies, call back to being, we must find a way of surpassing the constraints of conventional alphabetic signification. This is telling about the loss of being, the why question. And Rosen is pointing to that writing itself and its semiosis cast being into oblivion, into darkness. There is a wedged reality after writing. It was so telling when he mentioned privately his childhood memory of how the depictions in the book were not representative of something else. in the child, still there is the innocence of being, of wholeness. I would call it nearness. The logs in the northeast were moving when he saw and read in the book. It was the things themselves and not what they meant. One could say that in modern day, and with the end of philosophy, meaning or semiosis has captured our reality. Throwing both perceiver and perceived way out, away from everything. And meanings are in some manner akin to what we called monetizing in the penultimate lecture, 1179, and also mentioned by Paul Feyerabend in his seminal book, The Conquest of Abundance. After semiosis, meaning takes over. Being can no longer show itself. It's a bit like Adam and Eve. When she took an apple, it was grasping the apple. A meaning it would give to her life, and thereby symbolic of giving up wholeness, the paradise. We cast ourselves out with meaning, a universalized, nondescript meaning without the talismanic true character of reality. One could say meaning is a monetized reality. A drachma, or a tetradrachma if you like, for reality. We lose reality and we get this coin that we want. The apple that Eve took. The greediness will construe more objects. Our greed for knowledge. How well put in the Genesis. And we also see that we become slaves to meaning. We are not vividly participating anymore. We become collapsed, tensed, and especially, as was mentioned in the penultimate lecture, the tension around the eyes, making they embody the greed for meaning, for the objects, to capture them. Rosen added something personally. I can add what I experienced this morning in the bus going here. How people were led by this greedy eyesight, the eye mind, or what we earlier called the reflective consciousness, the automated false eye, looking everywhere, haunted almost, haunting themselves in search of meaning, what it represents, captivated, or as Wittgenstein would have it, hypnotized by what we think is an image. Maybe some comment, Kalle? I will put it on. Can get it off.
Can put it here? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Ease up a bit.
So there is a fragment by Heraclitus that ends with the words, with this word. So the oracle of Apollo